The crowd thought they'd seen everything that day. F-35s tearing the sky, Rafales screaming through vapor, Typhoons climbing like arrows. But then a single shape slipped into view, Russia's Su-57. No roar, no warning. Just one low, impossibly smooth pass that froze the entire Dubai Airshow mid-breath. Engineers stopped speaking. Pilots lowered their sunglasses. Even the announcer went silent. Because in that single pass, something felt different, something sharper, something the world wasn't expecting Russia to reveal in Dubai. And for the first time all day, every other jet suddenly felt outdated. Dubai Airshow was never meant to slow down. It's the one place in the world where noise is a language, where jets don't just fly, they announce themselves. F-35s scream through vertical climbs, Rafales peel vapor trails with surgical precision, Typhoons roar like arrows fired from the sun itself. Every pilot comes to Dubai believing they will be the loudest, the flashiest, the one who steals the applause. But that morning, something strange happened. The airshow wasn't loud. It was loud until something arrived. The sun was sharp over Al Maktoum Airport, heat shimmering across the tarmac. The demo announcer was still hyping the next performance when a faint outline appeared over the far horizon. No thunder, no aggressive entry, just a smooth, predatory glide. A pilot in the VIP stand squinted first. "Is that?" Another lowered his binoculars. "No, it can't be. Not here." But it was. A single Sukhoi Su-57, Russia's stealth jewel, sliding into Dubai airspace like a shadow given wings. No afterburner flare, no power flex, just a cold, calculated entry. People didn't cheer. They didn't even speak. It was as if the jet carried silence with it. The Su-57 wasn't scheduled for this slot. Everyone knew that. Russia never reveals anything unscripted. And yet here it was, descending into the pattern like it owned the sky. The announcer broke mid-sentence. Camera crews scrambled. Even rival pilots felt their stomachs tighten. The crowd didn't know why, but the experts did. Russia never sends a Su-57 for an unscripted flyby unless there's something to show, or something to prove. The stealth fighter dipped its nose ever so slightly, slicing through the heat haze with absolute composure. Its wingtips caught the sunlight, turning the aircraft into a silver X-shaped phantom against the desert sky. A French Rafale pilot muttered, "Look at that stability. Mon Dieu." A Lockheed engineer whispered, "That glide ratio, that isn't normal." A UAE officer leaned forward. "This isn't a demo. This is a display of intent." The Su-57 descended into its pass, low, impossibly low, barely 60 feet off the runway, its shadow skimming the ground with surgical precision. But what froze everyone wasn't the altitude. Not the perfect alignment. Not even the stealth geometry cutting the air like a blade. It was the sound. There wasn't any. A jet that size, at that speed, should have torn the air open like a thunderclap. Instead, it slipped through the Dubai sky with a whisper. A presence felt more than heard. Heat rippled behind it, but the engine sang in a quiet, controlled tone, as if the pilot purposely hid the roar. The silence was unnatural. People blinked. Some gasped. A child clutched his father's arm and whispered, "Baba, why is it so quiet?" The father couldn't answer. Because no one expected Russia to pull this off, especially not here, not in front of American, French, Turkish, and Chinese delegations. The Su-57 continued its pass, wings level, shimmering like a ghost drifting through sunlight. Every camera followed it, every face tilted upward, every conversation died instantly. Then, the moment. As it crossed centerline over the crowd, the jet did something no one saw coming. It pivoted. a nearly impossible sideslip, a micro-yaw maneuver that showed off the Su-57's infamous 3D thrust vectoring, but in a way no Western jet could replicate. An F-35 pilot inhaled sharply. That's not aerodynamics. That's sorcery. A Turkish engineer whispered, "We can't do that. Nobody can." The Su-57 held the glide for 3 breathtaking seconds. 3 seconds where Dubai Airshow felt like it was suspended in time, before it pulled away with the same eerie silence, banking toward the horizon where it had appeared minutes before. No flare, no signature, no roar, just exit, just shadow, just dominance. And as the jet disappeared into the glare of the desert sun, the announcer finally exhaled into the microphone, voice shaking slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Su-57." But by then, he didn't need to say anything. The airshow had already understood. 1 pass, 1 maneuver, 1 jet. And Dubai froze. For several long seconds after the Su-57 vanished into the desert glare, the airshow felt strangely hollow, as if something had been taken out of the sky. The noise was still there. F-16s prepping, engines warming, the announcer trying to get back on script, but none of it registered. The crowd wasn't listening. The pilots weren't blinking. Even the engineers staring down at their tablets had forgotten to breathe. Everyone had just witnessed something too clean, too controlled, too deliberate. A single pass shouldn't have done that. And yet, here Dubai stood, silent and stunned. The Su-57 hadn't roared. It hadn't done the thunderous aerobatic stunts Dubai audiences are used to. Instead, it delivered a message, a whisper-sharp reminder that a fighter doesn't need noise to dominate. But the real shift didn't happen in the crowd. It happened among the experts. Dozens of military delegations, American, French, Turkish, Chinese, Emirati, all began moving in the same direction almost instinctively, like predators chasing a scent. They converged near the edge of the VIP ramp, eyes fixed to the sky where the Su-57 had flown moments earlier. Because aircraft don't simply slip through air that quietly. Not at that speed, not at that weight. Something had changed. A French aerodynamicist shook his head in disbelief. That side slip. I've never seen that controlled at low altitude. A Lockheed Martin propulsion specialist lowered his sunglasses. That wasn't standard thrust vectoring, not how we do it. A Chinese delegation member muttered quietly, "If that was the new Saturn engine variant, then Russia is farther along than we thought." Whispers spread like wildfire across the viewing stands. Every statement more unsettling than the last. An Emirati Air Force officer stared at his colleague, brows furrowed. "Did you feel that?" "What?" "The silence. When it passed. It felt like the jet was absorbing the sound." His colleague didn't respond, because he had felt it too. The Su-57's aerodynamic signature during the pass wasn't normal. The airflow around it looked almost stable. Too stable. As if the jet was cutting through the atmosphere with a shape optimized for stealth and acoustic dampening, a combination extremely difficult to achieve. But just as the experts thought they had time to digest what they saw, the Su-57 returned. It didn't roar in. It didn't announce itself. It didn't even give the audience time to reposition. The jet slipped back into view from a higher altitude, almost unnoticed at first, its silhouette shimmering in the heat. A young spotter in the crowd shouted, "It's back! It's coming back around!" Within seconds, every camera was raised, every head tilted skyward. The announcer stuttered through his script, unsure if this was official or another unscheduled maneuver. But the pilots knew. They could sense the setup. This was the alignment for a controlled high-alpha pass, the kind of maneuver that requires absolute mastery and absolute confidence in your airframe. The Su-57 descended again, not toward the runway this time, but toward the center display box, the one area during the show where only approved jets perform. It drifted nose up, body angled like a cobra ready to strike, the aircraft's massive control surfaces adjusting with tiny, almost surgical corrections. The jet seemed to float, suspended between lift and gravity, its engines whispering through the hottest air and the Gulf. A Turkish K-9 engineer gasped, "That shouldn't be possible at that angle." A British pilot muttered, "Not that slow, not that steady." Then came the sound. Not a roar, but a low, vibrating hum, like a muted growl. The Su-57 wasn't flying anymore. It was balancing. It held the high alpha stance for what felt like a lifetime, in reality only a few heartbeats, letting Dubai see the one thing Russia rarely shows in public: complete aerodynamic control. With a flick of its vectoring nozzles, the fighter straightened, settled, and accelerated upward in a steep, clean climb, vanishing once again into the sun, leaving a stunned silence behind. A UAE colonel whispered the sentence that captured the entire moment. Russia didn't come to compete today. They came to remind us. And with that, the Su-57 had done the impossible. It made Dubai Airshow forget every other jet in the schedule. The moment the Su-57 disappeared again, the tension didn't fade. It thickened. Dubai Airshow had seen its share of surprises, unexpected flypasts, last-second demo changes, even full-blown mid-air rivalries. But this was different. This felt coordinated, deliberate, almost strategic. And the most unsettling part? Russia wasn't saying a word. They didn't send officials to boast. No PR staff parading around with brochures. No social media crew filming reactions. Silence. And that silence was speaking louder than any roar in the sky. A group of American pilots from the F-35 demo team huddled near the fence line, arms crossed, brows pulled tight. One finally muttered, "That high alpha pass. We don't show ours like that." Another replied, "We don't have to show it. Ours is tested." But his tone lacked conviction. A third pilot exhaled, eyes still fixed on the empty sky. But why would they reveal that here? No one answered. The French delegation arrived next, moving like a coordinated unit. A Rafale M pilot, helmet tucked under his arm, stared at the flight path the Su-57 had taken. "That wasn't a demonstrat." "Tian," he said softly. "That was a warning shot." His teammate frowned. "To who?" The pilot's jaw tightened. "To everyone." Just then the sound of approaching footsteps echoed. The Turkish Ka-An engineers, their expressions a mix of awe and calculation. One of them held a tablet still running a flight data capture app. Numbers streamed across the display. He whispered, "Look at the thrust vector differentials. Look at the drag curve." Another shook his head. "No prototype should fly that cleanly." An older engineer, someone who had seen decades of test flights, murmured, "That was not a stunt. That was operational confidence." Nearby, a Chinese military advisor stood quietly, hands behind his back. He didn't join the analysis. He didn't take notes. He simply observed, as if comparing the performance to something he had already seen. His silence made the surrounding whispers feel even louder. Then suddenly, a low rumble. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough to ripple through the air like a pulse. Heads snapped upward. The Su-57 was returning for a third time. But this time was different. Its approach vector wasn't aligned with the crowd or the runway. It was coming in sideways, slicing through the air at an angle that no normal fighter would attempt during a public event. A young aviation vlogger yelled out, "No way! Are they about to—" He didn't finish the sentence. Because the Su-57 dropped into a knife-edge pass, the fuselage vertical, wings slicing the atmosphere like a blade. The jet skimmed the display corridor sideways, the entire airframe balancing on pure vector thrust authority. Gasps erupted across the seating stands. A British Typhoon pilot swore under his breath. A Saudi officer clutched the railing. Even a group of Russian observers, supposedly familiar with the jet, stood frozen. Knife-edge passes weren't rare, but knife-edgy. Passes at this altitude, with this stability, with this little engine signature, were unheard of. A Lockheed engineer murmured, "Look at the directional control. Look at the yaw stability. This shouldn't be possible at that speed." Another replied, "It isn't, unless they've reworked their entire vectoring system." The Su-57 held the knife edge for a breathtaking 4 seconds. 4 seconds where gravity, drag, thrust, and stealth geometry balanced in perfect harmony. Then, with a graceful flick, it rolled back to level flight, fired a short controlled burst from the exhaust, and climbed out of the box like a phantom rising through heat. The roar finally hit, a delayed thunder that washed over the stunned crowd like an aftershock. And then, silence again. A UAE general turned to his aide. His voice was low, but firm. "Make no mistake, Russia wanted this demonstration seen, and not by Dubai, by everyone watching Dubai." At that moment, jets were still lined up for their scheduled displays. Pilots were ready, engines prepared, flight teams waiting for clearance. But the emotional atmosphere of Dubai Airshow had shifted permanently. It didn't matter who flew next. The sky already belonged to the Su-57. The shock from the Su-57's third appearance rolled through the air show like a silent wave. You could almost feel it, the way people shifted in their seats, the way conversations broke mid-sentence, the way even competitors paused their own routines to look upward. Dubai Airshow is designed to be predictable, scheduled demos, polished transitions, crisp announcer timings. But now the schedule didn't matter. Because everything, every aircraft, every display, every headline, was now being measured against a single Russian jet. Even the announcer sounded different when he finally spoke again, as if the Su-57 had shaken the confidence out of the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated for the next scheduled performance." No one moved. Across the static park, delegations began forming their own circles, analysts huddling, pilots replaying mental footage, engineers punching invisible calculations into the air. This wasn't excitement. This was assessment. This was fear disguised as curiosity. A group of Indian Air Force officers gathered near the fence, their expressions a mix of respect and concern. One of them, a test pilot, folded his arms. "That high alpha stability," he whispered. "I've only seen that in classified footage." Another replied, "You can't fake that. Not at this altitude." A third officer nodded. "And not in Dubai. Not with this many cameras." Meanwhile, the Chinese delegation had gone quiet. Very quiet. China had its own stealth fighter headliners, the J-20 and J-35, but the Chinese team watched the Su-57 with a rare seriousness. A Chinese avionics specialist leaned toward his colleague and murmured, "They're not showing an aircraft. They're showing a point." His colleague nodded. Russia wants the world to remember their seat at the table. Not far away, the French aviation team was deep in debate. A Rafale pilot paced slowly, replaying the maneuvers in his mind. "That knife edge, that was too controlled," he said, frustration edging his voice. The older French aerodynamicist replied, "If their thrust vectoring algorithms have matured, the Su-57 might finally be what they always claimed." A young French engineer swallowed hard. Meaning? A true fifth-gen operational platform? The older man didn't answer. He didn't need to. The British delegation shared similar unease. A former Typhoon pilot, now a test evaluator, sighed heavily. "I hate to admit it," he said, "but that flight profile, no European jet can do that at that speed." The British general beside him nodded slowly. "Which means NATO will have to respond. Somehow." But the most intense reaction came from the Americans. The F-35 demo team, normally confident, relaxed, sometimes even playful, now looked like they had taken a direct hit to morale. The squadron commander stared at the sky long after the Su-57 had vanished, jaw clenched tight. His deputy finally spoke. "Sir, do we need to adjust our display?" The commander didn't blink. "We're not competing with them today. We're avoiding a comparison." The deputy nodded, understanding instantly. If the F-35 did anything risky now, anything aggressive, anything that could look weaker than the Su-57's maneuvers, it would become ammunition for global commentary. Better to play safe. Better to avoid the fight entirely. Just then, a ripple of movement caught everyone's attention. The Su-57 was lining up for a fourth approach. But something was different. The angle, the speed, the altitude. A Turkish engineer pointed toward the sky, eyes wide. "They're going for a pitch-up reversal." A Saudi colonel raised his eyebrows. "Here? In front of all these cameras?" A British pilot shook his head. "No one attempts that maneuver in a public air show. It's too risky." But the Russians did. The Su-57 descended smoothly, almost quietly, before pulling into a rapid pitch-up, the nose shooting skyward while the fuselage rotated with shocking grace. Instead of losing control or bleeding speed, the jet pivoted, stalled for a split second, and then reversed direction like a hawk snapping in midair. People gasped. Someone dropped a drink. A pilot in the audience forgot he was holding his breath. A UAE commander whispered, "Dear God, they're showing us everything." When the Su-57 climbed out of the maneuver and accelerated away, the afterburner flared for the first time, a bright, violent orange that ripped through the sky like an exclamation mark. It wasn't a roar. It was a statement. A final reminder that Russia's stealth fighter wasn't here for applause. It was here to reclaim relevance. As the jet disappeared, a senior American defense analyst summed up the moment with one sentence. The Su-57 didn't challenge the airshow, it challenged the world watching the airshow. And Dubai Airshow understood. This wasn't a performance. This was a declaration. The aftermath of the Su-57's pitch-up reversal left Dubai Airshow in a kind of stunned paralysis. You could see it in the way pilots stood frozen, helmets dangling loosely in their hands. In the way engineers stared at empty sky instead of their screens. In the way ambassadors and military officers whispered faster than they breathed. Everyone knew what they'd just witnessed was not routine. That maneuver, violent, precise, and impossibly controlled, wasn't an airshow trick. It was capability. And it was public. For Russia to reveal that in Dubai meant one thing. They wanted the world to see. And the world was seeing. A cluster of American defense officials stepped away from the VIP stands, all speaking at once, all trying to decode what they had just watched. One of them, a former F-22 program analyst, exhaled sharply. "That pitch-up reversal. We only show that in closed tests." Another replied, voice almost uneasy. "They're demonstrating maturity. Not prototypes. Maturity." A third analyst folded his arms tightly. "That vectoring response time. That wasn't the old Saturn engines. They have new software, or new hardware." They exchanged a look none of them wanted to acknowledge openly. Russia, despite sanctions, despite budget strain, despite the skepticism around the Su-57 program, had just shown something frightening. Progress. Meanwhile, the Chinese delegation, often calm, often unreadable, looked almost irritated. A senior Chinese officer whispered sharply, "They weren't supposed to do this here." His colleague responded, "Russia wants the spotlight, and now they have it." The mood among the Europeans was more analytical than emotional. A German Eurofighter pilot leaned back on the railing, eyes narrowed. "You realize," he said quietly, "that was a dogfight maneuver." A French engineer nodded. "At that angle, at that altitude, that's a challenge." The British pilot beside them sighed. "And we're not scheduled until next." Brilliant. None of them meant it as a joke, because every jet flying after the Su-57 was now at risk of looking lesser. But the country that took the impact the hardest was India. A group from the Indian Air Force stood shoulder to shoulder, silent. The lead Indian test pilot finally spoke, voice heavy but honest. "If they can do this consistently, our AMCA timeline must change." Another pilot, usually confident, added, "This is the kind of maneuver you reveal when you want adversaries to recalculate." His colleague nodded. "And partners to reevaluate." It wasn't bitterness. It was realism. Across the tarmac, the crowd began buzzing again as faint engine noise returned to the horizon. The Su-57 was coming back. But this time, it wasn't alone. A pair of escort aircraft trailed behind, smaller support jets that hadn't participated all day. A coordinated return, a flight group, a deliberate framing of dominance. A UAE general's eyes widened. They're staging their exit. And he was right. The Su-57 descended one final time, not low, not aggressive, but with the confidence of a jet that didn't need to prove anything further. It slid along the main display axis like a king taking one final walk through his own court. But halfway through the pass, something unexpected happened. The Su-57 cut its afterburner and drifted into a perfect power-off glide. Steady, balanced, and terrifyingly quiet. No jet its size should glide that smoothly. No stealth airframe should hold shape that perfectly without thrust. A Turkish flight dynamics expert whispered, That is insane. That's aerodynamics mastery." A Russian colonel nearby, hearing the comment, simply smiled without turning. The glide. It continued for a full 10 seconds, a lifetime in airshow terms, before the Su-57 reignited its engine and climbed into a steep, controlled ascent. No showboating, no flair, no drama, just precision, just dominance. Just the final punctuation mark on a message that didn't need words. Russia's fifth-gen fighter is not theory. It's here. It works. And it wants the world to know it. As the Su-57 disappeared for the last time, the airshow felt deflated. Not because the performance was over, but because everything else that followed would feel smaller, lighter, less consequential. Dubai had seen hundreds of aircraft over the years, but never a moment like this. Never a pass that made every expert reconsider numbers, budgets, alliances, timelines. Never a jet that weaponized silence, agility, and restraint like the Su-57 had just done. And as the applause finally broke, scattered, uneven, hesitant, everyone understood why. This wasn't an airshow highlight. This was a strategic demonstration. A geopolitical message delivered at 700 km/h, and the world had heard it loud and clear. Nightfall at Dubai Airshow is usually a celebration. Glowing runways, crowds buzzing, pilots signing autographs, exhibitors wrapping up deals. But tonight felt different. The lights were bright, the music played, the big screens flashed highlight reels. Yet the air had a weight to it. Because no matter how many jets flew after it, no matter how many engines roared across the desert sky, no matter how many aerobatic teams painted the horizon with color, nothing erased the shadow the Su-57 had left behind. As the sun dipped below the skyline, its last rays bouncing off the polished, static displays, the delegations didn't go back to relaxation mode. They didn't pack up early. They didn't casually socialize like they usually do. They talked strategy. They whispered quietly. They paddled in circles. They exchanged messages with their defense ministries in real time. The Su-57 hadn't just made noise, it had made questions. Questions that would echo across capitals far beyond Dubai. A senior UAE defense advisor stood near the runway, hands behind his back, gaze fixed on the empty sky where the jet had vanished hours earlier. "This changes procurement discussions," he said softly. His colleague frowned. "For everyone?" "For everyone," he replied, "all at once." Across the tarmac, the American delegation packed their gear slowly, unusually slowly. The F-35 demo team leader finally removed his headset, face unreadable. One reporter approached. "Sir, what was your reaction to the Su-57's flight today?" The commander paused, then answered carefully. "We came to perform. They came to demonstrate." Behind him, two U.S. analysts reviewed footage frame by frame, each more concerned than the last. One muttered, "That control surface response time, that's not what early Su-57 models showed." The other replied, "They didn't show an air show today. They revealed capability." Meanwhile, the Russian delegation remained the calmest out of all, almost too calm. A senior Russian officer strolled past, expression quietly victorious, as if everything had gone exactly as planned. A Western journalist called after him. "Colonel, was today's Su-57 routine or intentional?" He smiled without slowing his step. "In Russia," he said, "nothing like this is accidental." He walked into the night, leaving the journalist staring in silence. But the most captivating moment of the evening wasn't geopolitical. It was emotional. A group of young aviation fans, kids no older than 13, stood along the fence, replaying videos of the Su-57 on their phones. One boy said, "It moved like a game jet, but real." His friend nodded, wide-eyed. "I've never seen anything fly like that." And maybe that was the real truth. For an entire generation of new aviation fans, the Su-57 just became the benchmark. It didn't roar louder than the Rafale. It didn't climb harder than the Typhoon. It didn't show raw thrust like the F-15. It didn't hover like the F-35. It did something rarer. It made the whole air show freeze. It made the experts whisper. It made the world rethink what Russia was capable of. And that's what a true moment of air power feels like. Not noise, but presence. Not aggression, but precision. Not theatrics, but a quiet statement etched into the sky. As the runway lights dimmed and the crowds finally drifted away, a UAE senior planner summed up the entire day in one sentence. Dubai didn't just watch a jet today. Dubai watched a message. And that message, wrapped in silence and control, had landed harder than any sonic boom. If you enjoyed this moment as much as we did, stick around. Because the skies over Dubai still have stories left to tell, and the next jet might surprise you even more. Subscribe and stay ready for the next pass.